Hello and welcome to our conversation today with Dr. Anshu Sharma. This is part of Chintan's podcast conversations with people who know things that we all need to know. Anshu, welcome to this conversation. Um, Anyone who doesn't know Anshu, Dr. Anshu Sharma studied architecture in SPA Delhi. Then he went to Kyoto University, studied environmental sciences, got a PhD. He's a co founder of Seeds, an organization which was set up to look at disaster responses. And he's worked with over 100 disasters all over the world. But now he's running Seeds Technical Services, which helps people looking at mixing humanitarian intent with technical, absolute ground level intervention, which means you can actually do better work. And Anshu and Seeds per se have moved from conventional disasters to slower disasters like those brought on by climate change. So today we're really talking to him about heat in India. Anshu, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Bharati. It's always a joy having a chat with you.
Likewise. So, Anshu, what is a heat wave? How is it different from peak summer?
A heat wave is fundamentally a variation that is applicable to you where you are. So, a heat wave in one place may be at a different temperature than another, right? So, it's more about what you can and your system can manage. The summer is a season. Within the summer, there may be certain days that can potentially be harmful for you, and that's what we are trying to isolate and identify.
I see. So, a heat wave is happening all over India, in many parts of India. What does that mean for anyone who's looking at Instagram or the newspapers?
Okay, so yeah, let's break that down a bit. All of India is getting hotter, right? And this season's forecast that came out from the Indian Meteorological Department a few weeks ago showed that for the day temperatures as well as the night temperature, if you look at how it is moving away from what used to be the normal, the entire country is way hotter than it used to be. It need not necessarily mean a heat wave. It is moving away from the normal. It's a new normal, right?
I see.
Within that, there will be isolated pockets where we will hit extreme heat, and which is actually a slightly newer term we've started using. And I think coming from the sector that works on climate and disaster risks, I think we should honestly confess that extreme heat is something that has caught us by surprise. We were always prepared for coastal areas getting affected by sea level rise. We were aware of how the water stresses will hit us, but extreme heat we never realized will come so fast and so hard. So all over India, we are going to see the prognosis is that this season we will be seeing days that we've never seen at that level of heat. We will be seeing the combination of heat and humidity, which will not be visible but will hit people really hard. And then there will be a series of cascading things that will happen because of the heat, including surprisingly worse floods. And that's what we really need to talk about and be prepared for.
So, how do you get worse floods from heat?
So, if you look at soil, and there are very interesting, simple experiments for kids that one can watch even on YouTube. If you pour water on dry soil and if you put water on slightly moist soil, surprisingly the moist soil absorbs the water faster because there is certain water inside that will create a pathway and pull this water in. Dry soil has very dry air bubbles inside that are resistant to water getting in. That soil is called hydrophobic soil, right? Now, on that soil, when suddenly it's been so hot and water comes, most of the water will run off, lesser water will get absorbed. And so, if you look at data also, you will see after extreme heat periods, the floods are worse.
I see. So, we should expect extreme heat and much worse floods.
We should be prepared for extreme heat and much worse floods, and in between we should be prepared for worse fires, both urban and wildfires. We should be prepared for more incidences of water stresses, cities meeting their day zero, which is when the taps run dry. And when the water quantity drops, even the quality drops, the pollution concentrations go up. And so we should be prepared for seeing more problems around the quality of water.
So, quick question. Last year we saw a lot of people just suddenly collapsing, and and rushed to hospital, and it was debated whether it was the heat or some kind of bacteria or viral. When you get sick, how is it different from anything else related to a sunstroke?
It will continue to be debated, is my fear, because there are no clear guidelines on how do you identify a heat health problem. I still feel heat strokes have also been a problem, and the way the system tracks heat deaths is we look at unexplained spikes in deaths that are being reported, and if that spike coincides with a hot period, then you would attribute those, because a death is usually not written as a heat death or a heat stroke. It will be written as a cardiac arrest. It will be written as the symptom that eventually led to someone dying. It may have been triggered, right? So that's one part of the story. The system has figured out some ways to track that. What we are now beginning to see in a much deeper and worrying way is heat stress, which is more difficult to identify. We've always heard about, garmi se bheja pak gaya hai, right?
Huh.
And the other day I was walking with a colleague in one of the slums that we work in East Delhi, and there was this woman sitting there. She was just blabbering, very angry at nobody. There was no one in front of her, right? And then a street fight broke out between two young boys down that street. And we suddenly said, are people angrier when it's hot? Logically, yes. Can you actually do an anger map of the city and do it across seasons and figure out what's happening? Because heat and mental health is globally being recognized as a major issue,
I see.
right? So the invisibility of heat and the invisibility of the impacts. Blood pressure slightly higher, eyes are itchy, couldn't sleep well, I have a headache, feeling very tired. The kid can't learn in the school in that condition. The man who's doing a daily wage job cannot perform, productivity goes down. The productivity loss is being accounted in the billions, in the hundreds of billions of dollars globally, right? So it's coming at us, it has already arrived in a very big way, but we are not able to see it, and that's extremely worrying.
So that kind of brings me to something that I think of quite a lot, which is about in our cities, Indian cities or rather South Asian cities are very particular in two ways. One of them is almost a third of our population lives in slums. These are shanty informal housing made by people using their own skills and their own resources, and many of them have tin roofs. And that, let me ask you, what does that, is heat or heat wave kind of different for people
Oh,
in slums?
heat wave is different for different sections of people. A heat wave is different for every individual, right? So, where we are going with our improved understanding and also with the technology where we can handle a lot of data, we need to really break this down. You talk about slums, it's been well established. A number of credible studies say a slum is on an average 6 degrees hotter than the rest of the city, and we already know about the urban heat island. The cities are hotter than the countryside, right? Within that, the slum is hotter primarily because there's a lot of hard surfaces, there's hardly any open space, there is no greens, and they absorb and radiate that heat. Within that, the most recent phenomenon that we are really worried about is indoor heat, right? Uh, so we've been giving this advice that if there is a heat wave or it's very hot in the afternoon, don't go out. Don't go out between 12 and 4. That's the hottest period of the day,
Yeah, we read that.
right? We
Yeah.
read that. I'm sure. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandma and my mother used to say, "दिन में बाहर नहीं जाना, लू
हाँ,
लग जाएगी," right?
बिल्कुल.
And I used to imagine Lou as a person, but Lou was just
The hot
the hotness
breeze.
and the wind that would catch you. So you tell people to be indoors, and we've been installing, and we've done that with Chintan. We install these little devices called data loggers, where we are clocking temperature and humidity every 15 minutes or so, and you realize that on a hot day, actually not even a hot day, on a fairly warm day, when the temperature outdoors is about 38 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside a house, a shack in a slum, would be over 45 degrees Celsius.
So 6, 7, 8 degrees.
6, 7, 8 degrees is as bad as it gets. Who's indoors during the day? It's infants, their mothers, older people, sick people, people with disabilities who already have an individual, vulnerability. So why I said was sections and individuals. I think uh, COVID taught us about comorbidities, and COVID taught us all that the same virus will hit everyone differently, right?
Yeah.
You've suffered and I've suffered. Uh, Now, in that sense, what we still need to fully realize is that heat also hits every individual differently because of the factors in your body, and then heat hits every family individually separately because of the way you've built your house and you're living in it, how it absorbs heat, how it ventilates, and then it hits every section, the slum people more than the others, and so on. It's mind-boggling how many layers we still need to peel.
And I've been reading a lot about the wet bulb, which actually tells us that in a wet bulb scenario, you actually don't need peak heat. You need a combination of heat, which could be as low as 34 degrees, and humidity, which would be high. And that kind of is fatal almost. So they often say don't get heat wrong, get
Yeah.
wet bulb right. So what's your thought on that?
I think that's spot on. We are almost always getting heat wrong because we only look at the day maximum temperatures, right? And I think a while ago we started realizing, when we look at data, we started realizing that the night temperatures are also important because we were reporting more heat deaths, more in the homeless people on the hottest nights, not the hottest days, because otherwise normally at night you get some respite, the body
Yeah.
gets respite, right? And then you peel another layer, and that's when the heat index part comes in. And fortunately for us, the Indian Meteorological Department has started giving out heat index based advisories and warnings since last year, right? So index, exactly like you said, is the combination of temperature and humidity. And exactly as you said, a 49 degrees Celsius, which seems terrible, with a 10% humidity, is actually not as dangerous as a 35 degrees, which we would say is a good day, with a 80% humidity. Because at 35 with 80% humidity, your body stops cooling itself. It cannot sweat and cool itself.
Because it's so humid.
So your body starts cooking in its own heat. And I was talking to your colleague Baliji because we were trying to figure out how to communicate this in a simple language to people. And we where we were going was, जिस तरह आप चीज़ को भूनते हैं या उबालते हैं, how your body accordingly will either, in dry heat it is roasting
Yeah.
a bit and you can escape from that, but in humid heat there's no escape. Even in your house it is humid and you're literally boiling.
Literally. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a simple way to look at how the index works. The moment you add humidity, you go into your body cells steaming themselves out.
So that is just so frightening, but also so important to know. And my question is that now in our cities, we literally depend on outdoor workers, right? We depend on the safai karamcharis, on the waste collectors, the kabadi wala, the street vendor, the dhobi, all of these people, the phal wala, the sabzi wala. So they obviously are, likely to do way worse. And do you think there are very specific kinds of protocols we should, reach out to them with so that they also manage to make it through this heat?
Absolutely, yes. And I think we all see these co-citizens, and it always hurts, especially if you're in an air-conditioned bus or car and you see people toiling outside. There's a lot that can be done, Bharti. I think and it's not that people are not trying. I think a number of cities in India, about 100 odd cities, have started working on their heat action plans. Of course, things can be better. I think coming from the science side, I think the first and the most important thing is for all of us, including these people and the duty bearers in the city authorities, to understand what is happening and be able to anticipate it. We often say that the first step towards resilience is anticipation. We need to get into that space. And again, I I feel terrible that the science has failed the world in anticipating how heat will come and hit us. I think in the climate change discourse, it is the single most scary scenario that I see in the next few years, but it's already started, right? The first thing we can do is, let's not talk about global warming, let's not talk about heat in general, let's not talk about the heat season. Let's talk about the day it's going to get fatal for you, right? That's extreme heat. It's a very new term we started using. Let us all, including these people, be aware that there are periods where they need to be specifically alert,
Yeah.
and that's different from being safe during the heat season, right? It brings the sense of urgency in how we see and communicate it. I think breaking down things like the wet bulb and the index part, breaking down how certain individuals are more at risk. There are studies that we are right now going through and trying to do some in India on as nuanced things like pregnancy outcomes in extreme heat. And there's evidence that it's things are not great in that domain also. So it's across the board. So understand, anticipate, and take action. I think on the more tactile front, while we've already been giving, there are these do's and don'ts that come out. We say that 12 se 4, during the peak afternoon hours, don't do outdoor work and all that. That can be calibrated. On certain days, that period may need to be extended. When the nights are going to be hot, we may have to give a day off to people, right? There could be more tactile stuff like health relief kits. Carry a bottle, give a little cap to somebody, create heat shelters, and I'm sure you would have all noticed now Delhi government does winter shelter, right? Because
Yeah.
people, so you set up these little tents where there are little warming things and people can sleep. For the days and nights of heat, something similar can be done. It will actually be lower in cost than a winter shelter that we set up, but people need respite. If you give them few hours of respite, your survival rates will be way higher. So, all of this is very tactile. So, if we work on the knowledge and be able to anticipate, if we work on these devices and stuff that can help us do bits, and then if we can go and consolidate this, and that's where the heat action plans, I think the heat action plans are very ambitious. We can start with very baby steps. Let's have very simple heat action plans. We should have for our families, for our offices, for our
Yeah.
little neighborhoods, RWAs, and cities. Simple 10-step things. Let's start from there, and I think a lot really can be done. That's where the hope lies.
So, I was looking at a news report which actually says that countries in the Middle East are painting their roads blue, a kind of really bright kind of blue. And what do you make of that for, reducing heat?
I did see some of that too. It looks really nice.
Yeah.
And in the picture, it looked really cool and nice. I've not been on a blue road, but I've read a lot about the white roads because this has been thought of and tried as an innovation in a number of places globally in the past. And the usual problem people hit is that that road will now reflect light and heat like crazy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the people moving on the road, while the neighborhood's temperature, the heat that the ground is gaining will go down, but the heat that is reflecting on people will go up. So vehicles on that road and people on that road actually feel the difference, and it's not been super successful and scaled in many parts of the world. I still have to study what the color blue does. Maybe it's mera wala blue, maybe a good thing.
Yeah, that's also an interesting thing to think about because we find one solution, but we often don't put people at the center of the solution, right?
We don't put people at the center. The other, I think one thing that really bothers me is that we average people. We
Yeah.
think all people are alike, and I borrow that joke from the statistics world that if your head is in the freezer and your feet are in the oven, your body temperature is normal, right? As an
Yeah.
average. That's what we started doing to communities and to the weather. A monsoon once delayed will never be normal because
Yeah.
the rain didn't come when you wanted and came too much when you didn't want it. That led to floods. A heat season that has gone spiky on certain days is not a normal. You can't average it across the month. When you look at impact on people, you can't average it across people. So what we do, part of what we do is the science of breaking this down. Every family, every house, every building will heat up differently indoors and in its surroundings. And today, using satellite imagery, using the data loggers that we install, using AI models, we are able to measure and even predict how it is going to run. That's where we need to go. I think the day has to come sooner than later when we'll be able to say for every individual that as you move during the day, how your risk is moving because of who you are and where you are and how the weather is moving around you.
So that makes it very, very granular. On the other hand, if I was a ULB and I had to do something about heat, what would I be able to do? Because they have limited resources, limited technical, capacity, limited financial resources. What would you advise a urban local body to do? Maybe sitting in some part of Madhya Pradesh.
So I completely agree that there's a constraint, and I think the constraint is now not so much of resources, but a constraint of us being able to connect stuff, because they, to start with, they need very simple tools. We don't need international consulting agencies and
Yeah.
experts to come and make these very nice plans for this little city. That'll never happen. They need very simple tools that can be replicated. That is what our Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and our National Disaster Management Authority have been talking about. The know-how is there, and even the stuff that sounds fancy that I talked to you about, satellite imagery. The satellite imagery is there on your phone, right?
Yeah.
The AI models once made run literally for nothing. We have the know-how and the ability in the country now to be able to service these ULBs at a very good level. But even till that happens, the ULB needs to be just encouraged. It needs to be pointed to resources where it can find that knowledge. The entire city will not heat equally. It will have hotspots. It will not heat equally across every day of the heat season. It will have days. You can connect to the IMD and figure that out. If you know which are the worst of 10% of your population, a lot more can be done with frugal resources, and then it can be broken down into what people can do for themselves if they just get the right information in time, and the advisories. What is it that the municipality can trigger through other intermediaries, and what does it do for itself? I think if we break it down into 6 7 things, it's
It.
very doable.
So before I close, I am personally, I think like you, an advocate for community level work at the smallest level or at the lowest level. But people still turn around and say communities are made of individuals. So what should I be doing and showing my neighbors and convincing them to do so that we build up to a community? So do you have the top two or three ideas that people can roll out for heat waves?
Yeah, you're right. I believe exactly in that. In fact, we've right in the beginning of starting the seeds work, we used to have a slogan. Our first poster always said that the best disaster manager ever is going to be you and your neighbor, because when something goes wrong, it's your neighbor who's going to come and be of help to you, and the other way around too. I think on your question of what we can do is, I completely agree. Stuff has to start very locally, and I think from very simple things. Sometimes you have to do very visible, tactile things that create that sense, And you come from that age also, where in our childhood, you and I have seen the pyaus come up. We
Yeah,
have seen the bird baths being put out.
yeah,
These were, I think, more important than being nice to the birds and people. These There was an whole ecosystem that moved your mind space to knowing that it is hot
yeah,
and we need to live accordingly. And then your foods moved around that, and then you
yeah.
had sattu in the afternoon, and stuff around it. I think it'll be a great move, especially for people like you who have fan followings on social media, and when you
No,
write
I
stuff,
am.
people
I
really
don't
admire,
really.
and I do. We need to start. First of all, even before we point to the ULBs, we need to start talking about how families need to wake up, look back at what they were doing right, even a generation ago that they've lost, and fix things rather than switching on air conditioning on day one of the spring season. We need to figure out how our coolers were still good, how our khas chicks were still of relevance, how our work around water and foods was still of relevance. Let's start from there. That starts conversations. I'm fortunate to be in a neighborhood where my resident welfare association thinks and talks about this stuff, and I do contribute to that. It starts a movement. 10 groups talking like that start the seeds of a heat action plan that will be practical, grounded, and owned by the communities. I think no action plan can be driven if it's a big document that has been notified by the authorities, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've probably not done too well, but organizations like Chintan and Seeds and others still need to, and individuals like ourselves still need to work on how do we flip that whole notion around? How do we, turn the filter upside down and start talking about this like you're doing in this podcast? And thank you for this once again. But let's start the conversation that builds up to a practical heat action plan rather than write a heat action plan and then expect it to be administered and implemented.
Absolutely. And thank you for that conversation, Anshu. I mean, I think so many of these things I've learned from you over the years, which is why I was very interested that you come and speak. Thank you so much. And I hope this is going to be useful for people who are going to listen to this, because we all have to understand the problem and figure out, using our own innovation, how to address it, even if we can't actually solve it. Thanks, Anshu.
And so many things I continue to learn from you. And thank you for this conversation. Fires so many thoughts. A pleasure being with you, Bharti.
Likewise, Anshu.